Hey guys, what is going on? My name is Fen and happy Guy Fawkes Day. It's the 5th of November. Having a really good party tonight. Bonfire, pies and cake and all that kind of stuff. Just to celebrate Guy Fawkes because it's a nice celebration. But today we're going to be discussing what makes a good tank, or what is a good tank. And this came from a subscriber, and I like these kind of questions because it gives me something to answer. And let's start off with the basics. So what is a tank? What is a tank in World of Warcraft? Well, a tank is someone who actually takes the brunt of the damage from the PvE mobs. Now, tank are useless pretty much in PvP, player versus player, because it's a completely different scenario. You might get a tank who would run a flag, because of course they take less damage, and they have mechanics on their character that will reduce all incoming damage, so whether that's from PvE or PvP, it still reduces overall damage. So that's why sometimes you will see tanks as flag carriers, but the majority of the time you will see a tank in PvE situations such as dungeons, raids, and just generally tanking a mob. Now, what does it mean to tank a mob? Well, basically, you're trying to aggro the mob, you're trying to focus that mob or mobs onto your character, so them mobs are only attacking you. So all the damage is directed to you and nobody else. Because if a healer had to heal everybody like they did a tank, then it would not work, because it's just impossible to heal people when they're taking that much damage. So that is why tanks are there in the game. They're there to absorb all the damage, and because they're there to absorb the damage, they have certain stats that they have to require in order to, of course, reduce the amount of damage that they take. The less damage they take, the better for the healer, and generally better for the tank themselves. So there's many tanking classes in the game of World of Warcraft. I currently play a DK, which is a tank. It can be a tank, it can be a DPS. Now, why did I choose a DK? Well, DKs are very strong. They have self-heals, they have a lot of absorbs, and they just have generally a lot of survivability. Now, traditionally, a tank, you would think sword and shield, which that's what we had in vanilla. We had warriors and we had paladins who could use the sword and shields. We also have druids who kind of differ because they use dodge more than anything else. Because they're a bear, they cannot parry, which is a bit strange, but they can't parry, and they definitely can't use a shield, so they cannot block. Although you would kind of think a parry would be kind of a block, but it's a different mechanic altogether. And same with DKs, we don't have a shield, we have parry and dodge. We mainly focus on parry because we do actually have a weapon that we can parry with, but dodge is our secondary stat. So now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's talk about what makes a good tank, because the character you play does not make a good tank. Sure, if a class is easier for you to play, that could enhance the way you tank, but there's no specific class that is the best tank in the world and you could miraculously choose that class and be the best tank ever. It takes time and practice to be a good tank, and it also takes a lot of other things which we're going to discuss now. So one of the main things that tanks need to have is good observation or awareness. Now, if you're tanking, for example, if we're going to be tanking this mob here and we are zoomed in like mega far like this on our character and we're attacking away, it's going to be very difficult for us to see behind us, to see if anything is actually coming from behind. A patrol, maybe some DPS is trying to dodge some AoE on the floor and they've moved back too far and they've aggroed another pack, and you can't see it until it's too late, until they're dead, because, you know, DPS are pretty squishy, especially the casters. So if some hard-hitting mobs, for example the monks in Scarlet Monastery, come along, they're pretty much dead. So you've really got to be aware. You've got to have your camera at least pretty much zoomed out so you can see a lot of the basically the surroundings. You always want to be rotating your camera for different positions, because as a tank you don't have to move that often. You basically use your own discretion when you have to move. If there's AoE on the floor and you could absorb it, for instance, like me as a DK, I can use my anti-magic shell and I can absorb that. So if I know that that lasts for God knows how many seconds, I could stay in that AoE instead of moving the boss and spreading it everywhere else. So you basically use your own discretion in terms of where you need to move the boss and basically your awareness. Tanks also need a really good ability to lead. Now, why is that? Well, when you go into dungeons, you're the tank, you're the main focus of the group. People can't do much without you, so they expect you to be at the head of the group every single time of every single pull. They don't expect you to be AFKing. They don't expect you to be very slow and just like moving and pulling a mob, killing it, and then moving to the next, when you could quite easily gather a load of them up and kill them all together. So tanks need the ability to lead. That's why most guild masters are actually tanks, because they're at the front of the herd every single time and they're basically leading the charge. And it's the same with a guild master, he's there to lead the charge. Sometimes you will have a raid leader, sometimes the GM will be the raid leader, it really depends, but most of the time they will either be a healer or a tank. Most times out of 10 it will be a tank, because it's the most logical role to pick. So the next thing is ability to learn tactics. So when you're a tank, people rely on you for a lot of things, and one of them is actually tactics for bosses. This is obviously directed to PvE and raiding specifically, but then again it can comprehend the dungeons as well. But I'm thinking about raiding here, and if you don't know the tactics and people have to explain to you and you don't understand them, it's going to be very difficult for you to be a successful tank, because if you die, that's bad. Your job is to survive, so it's about popping cooldowns when you need to, when this boss is going to do this. Do you actually need to pop this cooldown, or could you survive it? Will a healer use their cooldown instead of you blowing yours? Will yours be more suited for this next ability that's coming instead of this healer's that, let's say for instance, absorbs only 4k damage and the boss is going to be doing 2k damage? You know, is that viable, or would you want to pop your, let's say 10k absorb damage? And I'm going with small numbers here, it's just to keep it basic. So you need to really know when and when not to use your own cooldowns, and when other cooldowns might be a better situation. And also tactics in general, you need to know what the boss is going to be doing, which way he's going to be doing it, which direction he's going to be heading off next, and this needs to be learned. You generally can find all this information before the raids actually go live from people who have actually done it on the PTR or in the open beta. The information is there, you just need to do a little bit of searching for it, and if you don't, then you're going to be basically a vulnerability to your raiding group, really, because you really need to know the tactics. So that is one of the things that you need to know. Now, one of the things that makes a good tank is how fast that tank is. Now, when you're tanking, you really want to be going from pillar to pillar. For instance, if these mobs are here, I'm not really in tanking spec, but for instance, if I have, let me get Blood Boil out. So I'll whip out Blood Boil here, I'll probably aggro these, I'll run round, I'll do another Blood Boil, and then I'll come over here and I'll use this so I can gather them all up. And then I can actually start using Blood Boil again and making sure my diseases spread and all these mobs are gathered up. And if needed, that's the time when I'd be popping cooldowns to make sure I don't die. Especially in dungeons, this is where it's mainly used for, chain pulling, which would be in dungeons. You really need to be able to actually pull multiple mobs. Think of it more like a gauntlet where you have to pull multiple mobs, you don't have a choice. That way is a better way of thinking, simply because if you're a slow tank, it's boring for the other people, it takes longer, and being in one dungeon for over an hour is just horrendous. It really is a bore. And it just makes everyone else really slow. I mean, you're not challenging the healer, because all he has to do is put a renew on you if he's a druid or something like that, or a priest or whatever. One heal will keep you up because you're only tanking 3 mobs, and if you've got the avoidance, then you're not going to be taking any damage whatsoever. So why not pull more mobs? Why not chain pull? It's very simple to do, and the only way you're going to learn for the long run is actually to practice in the dungeons. So don't be afraid to practice. If you mess up, then you mess up. It's as simple as that. But you will learn for the next dungeon. Much like when I started off tanking in Mr. Pandaria, I didn't do any of the dungeons in the beta, even though I had access, because I didn't want to spoil it for myself when Mr. Pandaria went live. So when I went into dungeons, I messed up a few times. But then when I went into the dungeon again, I knew exactly what to do. And basically, I adapted, and that's one of the things that people need to be able to do. Now, another thing is being courteous. Courtesy is a rare thing in games, but everybody has the ability to be courteous. Now, what do I mean about courteous? Well, if your healer has low mana, be courteous and wait. If you know you could tank mobs, and the healer is still drinking, tell him, say, you drink, I'll just pull the next pack, I'll be okay. It takes a few seconds to type that, and it's just being courteous that will help your group. It'll make a much more funner group, and it'll just make a much more nicer experience for you and your DPS. If a DPS has low DPS, and you know how to DPS, don't say he's a noob or a scrub or anything like that. Try give him hints. An example would be, I was in a dungeon with Rookie, and the tank we had was a Brewmaster, and he was a terrible, terrible tank. But we did troll him through the dungeon, which I wasn't being courteous, so I'm kind of being a hypocrite here. But it's still a good thing to be courteous and try to be courteous. I know sometimes it's hard, especially when people are really bad, but just try. You can only try, right? That's life. You can only try. But anyways, the moral of the story is that at the end of the dungeon, I told him, if he wants some advice on tanking as a Brewmaster, then just let me know and I will help him. And he said, okay then. And we spent about 5 to 10 minutes actually talking about the Brewmaster, what his stats should be, what his priority and stuff should be. And at the end of it, he said, I wasn't even using Blackout Kick. And Blackout Kick is his number one priority of damage mitigation, and he wasn't using it, so no wonder he was dying every single pull. That's the moral of the story, really, that people sometimes don't know what to do, but if you can help them, the next time they go tank, even if it's not for you, if it's for someone else, then they will know what to do, and it will basically enhance other people's experience with that player. If it's his first time tanking, he picked a very, very difficult class to start tanking with, which I'll go through at the end, which is the easiest tanks to play, which is the hardest. And I guess the last thing I want to talk about is blowing cooldowns, which I've kind of already gone over, but blowing cooldowns or knowing when to blow cooldowns is very important, especially on raid bosses, because trash, you can blow cooldowns whenever you want, really. You can blow cooldowns every single trash pack if you want when they're off cooldown. They don't do anything for you, except obviously reduce your damage intake, but there's no point not using them, unless of course you're coming up to a boss and you know that boss hits hard. But most of the time you don't really need cooldowns for heroic bosses, because they are just really, really easy. Sometimes trash packs are actually more difficult than the bosses in the dungeons. So use your own discretion and use cooldowns whenever. If you know there's not a boss for a good 3-5 minutes, then blow cooldown on a trash pack. Pull a load, blow your cooldown, and you're pretty good to go. So the last thing I want to talk about is tanking classes, which is the easiest tanking classes to play. Well, the easiest tanking class to play, in my opinion, is, let's go from the first one, which will be the easiest, to the last one, which will be the hardest. So the first one would be a Paladin. Paladin tanks are extremely easy to play. They're just overall very easy. They've got block, they've got parry, they've got dodge, they have AoE, basic damage, they've got AoE, aggroing abilities, consecration, have the righteous, they've got single targets, they've got hard hitting abilities, they've got bubbles, they've got cooldowns, they've got heals, they've got an arsenal of things to use basically. So the next one I would say would be a DK. The DK is actually pretty damn easy to play. We've got a lot of heals, we've got a lot of absorptions, we've got a lot of self-healing, and we've got a lot of parry, we've got really good cooldowns. Just generally the DKs are pretty damn strong, and they don't require a lot of knowledge to play. The only thing that DKs will probably be hard about is actually using the abilities at the right time and just making sure your diseases are up. That's pretty much the extent of how hard DKs are to play. Now the next one would probably be warriors. Warriors are kind of the next level up. They're sometimes referred to as the best tanking class in the game just because of how versatile warriors are and how they can get around, how they can absorb a lot of damage. They now have self heals and stuff like that, so they are pretty damn good, but they're not that hard to play in terms of other classes, which we're going to talk about next. So the other class would be the druid. Druids aren't particularly hard to play, but because they only have one type of mitigation, which is dodge, they do become quite difficult to play. They have 0 parry, they have 0 block, but they do have a shit ton of dodge, and they also have the highest armor in the game. And it's much like Brewmasters, which we're going to talk about next. And just let's quickly go back to druids. Druids now have been changed quite a lot since Cataclysm, Wrath of Lich King, and Vanilla and TBC. They have really changed a lot. They now have 2 types of I guess tanking talents. They've got dodge, and they also have a heal. So you can kind of gauge what you need to do as you're tanking. Do you need a little bit more healing to top yourself off? Then throw a heal up there. Do you need a little bit more dodge? Then throw some dodge up there. It really depends, but I think druid classes are relatively hard to play in terms of tanking, just because you only have one mitigation to play with really that would stop you from dying. So that's my opinion, of course. And the last one, which is the hardest class to play as a tank, is the Brewmaster. Now, the Brewmasters are the newest tanks out, so they do need a lot of tweaking still. But generally, they are the hardest tank to play because their mitigation is something you can call active mitigation, which basically means that if you are using your abilities, you won't have any mitigation whatsoever. The other classes that we talked about just before, they all have just pure mitigation. It's right there in front of them. Druids generally have a high dodge rate anyways, but they're obviously the second hardest to play because you have to use an ability to increase your dodge to increase your survivability. But with warriors, paladins, and DKs, we all have a quite high set of block, parry, and dodge. Of course, DKs don't have block, but we do have a really high parry chance, which is great, but we don't have to do anything to increase that. It's just there. It's just a bare minimum parry. You increase it with your gear and with gems or whatever you need to do, but the stat is there. We don't have to use an ability to generate that. Unlike druids, they have to use an ability to generate dodge, and brewmasters, they have to use 2 abilities to generate dodge and parry, so they are extremely difficult to actually play, especially for new tanks, because they are so difficult. Tracking your shuffle, which increases your parry by 20%, it's got a 6-second timer, so it's up for 6 seconds and then it will go down and fall off. So if you're not tracking it, you're going to lose it very, very quickly. And much like Brewmasters, they're very hard to keep alive, I suppose, in trash packs, because our other ability besides Shuffle, which is the parry, is Elusive Brew, which basically increases our dodge, but we don't generate enough Elusive Brew to make it viable. Sometimes we don't even generate any when we are actually AoE pulling, because we have to constantly keep the AoE threat up, which when we are spinning crane kicking, we can't do anything anyways. We can't punch, we can't use any other abilities, so we're kind of locked out then when we're using it. So you've got to be really careful when using it, and that's why you would normally keep parry up. That's pretty much the thing you would keep up 100% of the time, which is very doable. So guys, that's my opinion. If you've got an opinion on what you think the hardest tankings are from easiest to hardest, then leave it in the comment section below. It'd be really nice to see what everyone else's opinions are. And I hope you got something from this video about tanking and what it kind of takes to be a tank. I know I've rambled on for quite a while now, so I'm going to end this video here. So thank you for watching again, and I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, guys, because it really does help me out, and I will catch you next time. Peace.